Okay, so I want to share with you a little bit about the prefixes that are used often with verbs of motion. Now these prefixes go well with verbs of motion, but you'll find them throughout the Ukrainian language with verbs. And I remember when I was studying Ukrainian, and this is true for many people studying Ukrainian, verbs of motion are particularly difficult. For an English-speaking mind, it seems like we have pretty much one verb of motion, go. And we also have things like walk or run, but in Ukrainian there are many verbs based on the fact, and they differ by their prefixes. So I want to go through some of the more common prefixes that are used with verbs of motion and illustrate what they mean. And before I start, I want to say that for me, one of the things that was important to understand as I was studying this is that these prefixes can be used with different words, and a given prefix tends to carry either the same or very similar meaning. And so you learn to build different verbs by taking a given prefix and sticking it on different verbs to build different words. So I'm gonna give you a list of some of the more common ones and try to explain these quickly and illustrate how it works. So the first one we'll start with one actually without a prefix, the basic verb for to go. So the most basic verb you'll hear translated for to go in Ukrainian is ite. And it loosely means just to go by foot or to go in a generic fashion. Then there's also yichate, which is to go by some means of transportation. Usually that means like a car or bus. It technically can mean by plane. They have a specific word for to fly. But if you just say like I went to America, you can use this word yichate, and it's understood that you flew, but it just means that you go by transport. They also you can divide these typically into two groups. In another video I talked about perfect and imperfect action, so there's that breakdown. But there's also what you might call the durative or iterative versions. So for example, in English, we might make a distinction between saying that I go to school, as in I attend school on a regular basis, or I am going to school right now. And when foreigners learn English, that's a common mistake. When you ask them like, where are you going? They'll say, I go to school. And what they don't mean they attend school in general, they mean they're going right now. So as in English, so in Ukrainian, there's this distinction. The verb ite is more like I'm going right now. That's what you're doing at the moment. Whereas if you want to say like I go to school in general, like I'm not truant, I attend school, then you would use the verb ходити. So if I say я йду в школу, that means I'm literally walking right now to school. If I say я ходжу в школу, then that means that I attend school regularly. And there's an equivalent for the transport verb. So the basic form of go when we're talking about say car or bus would be їхати. If I say я зараз їду в Ameriku, it can mean the same as in English, like in the future I'm going to go to America. It could mean technically I'm on the plane right now. But if you wanted to say, for example, like, oh, every year I visit America, you could say кожного року, every year, я їжджу в Америку. And the infinitive there is їздити. So that means the same thing, to go by transport, but it gives the idea of regular or repeated motion. So now I'm going to go, so that's our basis there, and now I'm going to go through some of the prefixes. So to start with, we'll have the v or the u prefix, and those are the same in terms of meaning, but they vary based on whether they're preceded by a consonant or a vowel. So for example, and this prefix means to go into. So if I want to say like I went inside the building, just the infinitive would be війти в будинок, to go inside. So іти is just to go, but війти is to go inside. And the interesting thing is you can take that prefix v or u and you can stick it in front of many verbs of motion and have a similar meaning. So for example, let's say hypothetically you wanted to communicate that you flew into, like I flew into a cloud, you could say я влетів, влітати or влетіти into somewhere. And the same, so that's the iterative form, and we also have the durative version of that. So you could say входжу, входити would be to go in, like, I don't know, every week I go into the store. Кожного тижня я входжу в магазин. That would be repeated motion. And the same for їхати, like the transport version. So you have в'їхати, that is a verb you might encounter when someone's talking about an auto accident. You could say, oh, this guy was coming so fast and then he just drove right into the building. Він в'їхав в будинок. And then the repeated form would be в'їжджати. So another one that is kind of the antithesis to that v prefix is the v prefix. So if vite or uvite is to go into, then vite is to come out of. So vite, I go in, and vite, I go out. В'їхати, I drive in, як я в'їхав into the garage. Виїхав, I went out. And there are slight, sometimes shadows of meaning on that. So for example, if I said, я виїхав з гаражу, then that would mean like I was in my car and I drove out of the garage. But a lot of times you'll hear people say, they'll ask like, hey, where did Ivan go? Де Іван? О, він виїхав. And if someone just says it like that, what they mean is that he emigrated, or he left, or he went out, usually of the country or something. And then there's the repetitive form, or the durative form, виходити. You'll hear that here in Ukraine, you'll hear that on the marshutkas, the microbuses a lot. As a driver approaches the bus, he'll say, виходять. And literally that means like, is anybody getting out? Does anybody want to go out of the bus? And people will they will say nothing, or they'll say выходят, выходят, and it means like they want to get off. So выходите from the bus would be to go out. Another very important one that we use all the time in Ukrainian is pri. So pri is usually the idea of coming or drawing or pulling towards you. So this summer, the organization I work with is planning a summer project. And someone might ask me if is anybody coming to Ukraine for your project this year? And they could use the word приїхати. So the sentence, for example, would be чи хтось приїде цього року? Is somebody going to come this year? And again, you would say приїде as opposed to прийде, because it's understood that if you're coming, for example, from America to Ukraine, you wouldn't walk or swim, you would come on a plane. So they would say приїде. If you wanted to say, oh yeah, we have some people coming, and that guy Bob, who comes every year, he's coming again. Той Боб, який постійно кожного року приїжджає. The one who always comes every year, приїжджає. So it gives you that sense of he's coming. He's not just in motion, but he's coming here, and he does it repetitively. One of the things when I first started learning motion verb prefixes that confused me was that up until this point it had been described to me the difference between perfect and imperfect verbs. And a lot of times, if you have an imperfect verb, it is a verb that's unadorned by a prefix. Whereas when you add a prefix on it, it makes it perfect. For example, if I say idu, or like maybe yidu, that would be imperfect. But if I say poyidu, then I'm talking about a specific time in the future, and that becomes a perfect. But with these durative forms, they can be actually like a process, kind of like in Ukrainian or in English we have like a continuous tense or something. So if I say приїжджає, that is a durative or a process, something that happens continually, and notwithstanding the fact that it does use a prefix. So another one so pri is to come, like to come to draw towards. You might say there's another word that's not really a verb of motion, but the word to draw or to bring inwards to yourself, притягує. For example, sometimes we'll say that God draws people to himself. We say Бог притягує людей до себе. So it's that same prefix pri. Another one that's kind of the opposite of that would be do. Do would be, if you just take the word do by itself, it's the preposition that's most loosely equivalent to our preposition to. So if I say walk over to the barn, loosely speaking, that would be do. And if you use it as a prefix in verbs of motion, it can mean to go the rest of the way, or to go all the way up to. So if I say дійти or дойти, it means like to walk up to. Я до нього, how would you say it? Like, it would be used mainly in the context where you're maybe trying to get somewhere and it's difficult, and you'd say, oh, нарешті я дійшов. Like, I got all the way there. The same with the transport version. Imagine you're on a difficult trip and you've had a lot of setbacks and you're having difficulty making it to your final destination, and you say, oh, нарешті Finally, о півночі, at midnight, ми доїхали. We finally arrived. We made it the remainder of the way. And I think I referred to this one actually in a different video, but you could use this with the verb to do to mean that you finished a task. You could say like я доробив це. And it would mean that you maybe had gotten sidetracked earlier, but finally you buckled down and you finished it. Я доробив. So another prefix would be nad. That one actually I'm not as familiar with, but you would have some, there is like nad іти, nad їхати, nad ходити, nad їжджати. Honestly, I don't use that one in conversation as much, but it's there. Another one that I use quite a bit is pro. So there is проїхати and пройти. Pro typically means like through. So if you had, for example, a long tunnel, and you wanted to say that you walked through the tunnel, you could say я це пройшов. You often hear, or if you were in a car, probably more likely, you would say я проїхав. Another one that is common when you're talking about the by foot form, the пройшов, is to use it in a more of an abstract sense. So someone might say я це вже пройшов, and they might mean like not that they physically walked through a tunnel, but that they passed through a process or a procedure, maybe at the doctor's office, and they had to go through a series of procedures and then finish them at the end, and they could say, oh, я це пройшов. So pro means through. And the same again, you could say пролетів, I flew through, проскочив, like I kind of jumped through. You can take that pro and stick it on a lot of different verbs, and it always has almost always will have something related to that through meaning. Another one is para. So the prefix para should call to mind the idea of crossing. If pro is through, para is to go across. So перейти дорогу would be like to cross the street. Переїхати is often used. You could say я переїхав something, and it could literally mean that you drove across a line. In many cases in everyday language, the verb переїхати means to move. Like when you're leaving one house and you're moving to a new home, someone might say, oh, we used to live at such and such address, but last year we переїхали to this new house. Another one would be за. So for example, зайти is very similar to війти, but there's a slight difference in meaning. So if I say like я увійшов в будинок, then it literally just means I went into the building. There's not really a whole lot of other meaning that's communicated, other than the fact that I was on the outside and I passed through, say, a door and I went inside. But if you say я зайшов, this is actually much more common in everyday talk, and in English it's kind of equivalent to saying I stopped in. Like I went in for a short time and then came back out. If someone said, if I'm talking to someone on the phone and they say, пізніше я до тебе прийду, like later I will come to you, then it's not clear. They might be coming for a long time. They might be coming to stay for the evening or have dinner or stay for a longer visit. If someone calls me on the phone and says, Josh, можна я пізніше зайду? May I later зайду, stop in? Then based on that prefix that they use, I would understand that they want to just maybe drop in for 5 minutes to give me something or to pick up something and then go again. Another one that's very interesting that I latched onto early in my study of verbs of motion is the ob prefix. So ob should call to mind the idea of going around something. So I was driving through the field and I came up to a tree and I drove around it. Я об'їхав дерево. Or I walked around it. Я обійшов. Every day I walk around it. Кожного дня я обходжу те дерево. Like, I want to cut it down because it's in my way, and every day I have to walk around it. Кожного дня я обходжу. And this can also be used in maybe a more abstract sense. So you could say something about, I can't think of a good example, but in general, the word or the prefix ob would mean to go around something. Another one is ros. So ros is usually a prefix on a lot of verbs. It's used very commonly, and it generally has the idea of to disperse or to scatter. So for example, if I said that we had a group of people and we got together at a coffee shop and we talked for an hour and then we separated and went home, went kind of spread out and went our separate ways. You could say мы разошлися. So there's in the middle you can hear the root of iti or ishli. In this case, it's the past tense. If I say rozishlися, it means like we separated and went apart. Another unrelated verb, but with the same prefix, is rozpoviste or rozpovidate. Now that's not a verb of motion, it means to tell. But instead of saying, I made a statement directly to somebody, if I say rozpovidate, it means that I'm telling a story or recounting an event. And it's more the idea that maybe I'm sitting in a group of people, everyone's listening to me, and I am sort of like dispersing my story, if you will. So you'll find this roz prefix all over the place. Rozitися can also mean divorce. If you have a married couple and we say like вони розійшлися, it means they separated and kind of like came apart, came asunder. Let me see if I've got a list here. Let me see if I skipped anything. Vid. There's another one. In fact, there's a couple here that are kind of like opposites. So there is pidite and vidite. Pid is kind of like, it's similar to pre, but instead of pre is more the emphasis on the speaker, and it's the approach of someone or something to him from his perspective. Whereas pid is also the idea of going up to something, but it's from the perspective more, I would say, of the person who's actually in motion. So for example, if we're at a park and there's a crowd of people, and I want to say that I walked over to this man, maybe I saw somebody was walking through the park and he dropped his wallet. And so normally I wouldn't talk to this person because I don't know them, but I saw that he dropped his wallet, he didn't notice that, and so I walked over to him and I told him, "Sir, you dropped your wallet." So in that case I might use the Ukrainian verb form of pid. And I would say "Я підійшов до нього," means I walked over to him. Now I could say "Я до нього пішов," but that kind of communicates something different. It leaves the hearer wondering why did you go to him. But if I say "Я підійшов," it kind of carries this idea that I just sort of approached him on a temporary basis, maybe to tell him something or whatever, and then came away. Now, the opposite of that would be відійшов. So if I said, I could say "Я до нього підійшов," I went up to him. "Я йому сказав, що він загубив гаманця." I told him that he lost his wallet. А потім я відійшов, and then later I went away. So pid is to go up to, and vid is to step back. Or to go away. Literally the verb for to step would be ступити чи наступити. So I could say like я відступив від нього. It would mean like I took a few steps back from him. So vid and pid. And the same, you could say я під'їхав. It'd be like saying I drove up, like to the drive-through. I wanted to order McDonald's. Я під'їхав до вікончика. I drove up to the window. І замовив собі McDonald's. So like if I want to go away, I might say, imagine a situation where my car is parked in the middle of the road. And someone comes along and asks me to move my car so that they can get around me or whatever. And so I would say like, він мене попросив, he asked me, і я від'їхав. I drove away. It doesn't mean, if I say я поїхав, then it would mean like I just drove away to another city. But if I say я від'їхав, it more carries the idea that I just pulled my car over to the side or out of the way. So one more time, let me go through these. The prefix v is like to go into, or you'll sometimes hear u, я увійшов, or я війшов, to go into. V is the opposite, to come out, вийшов. Yeah, I came out. При is like to come. Я прийшов. Над, it's written, again, this is the one I don't use as much, but it's written here like to arrive suddenly, like надійти, над'їхати. Дойти or доїхати would be like to go up to the end, maybe to finish a journey. Pid and vid are opposites, so pid would be maybe to approach somebody or to walk up to, whereas vid would be to withdraw or step away. Pro is the one where you're going through something, so я проїхав тунель, I drove through the tunnel, and also in the indirect sense or in the abstract sense, like я пройшов процедуру, I went through this procedure and finished it. Пере is the idea of to cross. Перекладати is the word to translate, and you can even hear in English we have our own root that means to cross. So translate means to go from one language to another. Transpile code is to change the code from one kind to another kind, or to another form. And in Ukrainian, this is пара. So переїхати would be to drive across or to move to a different building or to a different home. Перейти дорогу, to walk across the street. Then we have za, which to the English ear ends up sounding most of the time like zai, but it's the za prefix, and it can mean many things, but most commonly, if someone says like, I want to zайти to you later, it means like I want to stop in or stop by. Or it can mean just kind of like to go in for a short time and then come right back out. Об is to go around. Об'їхати would be to drive around. Обійти or обходити would be to walk around. And then lastly is the prefix роз, which is more like, you can think of it as to scatter or disperse. Розійтися would mean a group that separated and went in different directions. Somewhat similarly, the same prefix, розповідати, would be to tell a story. If I just want to say I said something to him, like I made a statement to one person, I would say, я йому сказав, I said it to him. But if I want to say like I was in a group and I gave an account or I told a story, then I would use this розповідати, which has that same prefix. So I hope these prefixes were helpful. As you start to get familiar with the prefixes and you hear them in different contexts, you quickly begin to associate them with certain ideas, going through something, going around, going across, and so forth. And then you can begin to mix and match. You can take the root verbs, you can combine them with prefixes, and you can come up with really powerful combinations to help you express yourself.